So, after all this time, and killing the Time Wizard formats or whatever, Konami have finally announced a new way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! One that doesn't require all new cards made for that way of play. Genesis format is really cool. No ban list, but some cards are given point values, and standard play only allows you to run a point total of 100 points. They also don't allow pendulums and links, probably to satiate some of the older players, pretty successfully from anecdotal evidence.
The pendulums? They got 2 effects on them. I don't even know how to summon a pendulum. Man, I stopped playing this game because of that.
But the cool part about the format is the no ban list. There are 100 point cards that are all but banned. You can't play any other pointed cards if you play these. And personally, I think it would be more fun if standard was 150 or even 200. But this is coming from someone who prefers faster formats. But this video isn't about Genesis. The format got me thinking about ban lists and all the other ways that card games try to balance their games. So let's talk about it and go over how this specific genre manages to keep decks and cards in check. And to start things off, let's talk about the game that is the exception to the rule. The one game that can balance the way that every other game does. The online card game, Hearthstone. And because Hearthstone is online, it doesn't have the restraints that printed cards do. And so what Blizzard does is analogous with what Riot, Capcom, and Blizzard do. If a card is too strong, then they can go in and change the numbers. Lower the attack, lower the health, up the mana cost, maybe even change the text on the card. And when a card is too weak, you can do the same thing. Up the numbers, lower the cost, change the text. Very standard way of doing things across the board. And when cards get nerfed, you get compensated a bit. The cards can be dusted for their full value in Arcane Dust, which can be used to craft other cards. A system that is the bare minimum, and is crazy that it's not universal among all online card games. But because Hearthstone is primarily balanced around one format of play, the cards are mostly made and tested for standard. We still get balance outliers when those cards hit wild and immediately require hotfixes. But hotfixing is more work than they want to do when balancing for 2 formats at once, so they just ban cards that are an issue in wild, but are still standard legal. And once they rotate out into wild, then they rework the cards, buff it, nerf it to make sure it's balanced there. But a quick side note before moving on, the nerfs may give refunds, but it's deceptive. Cards aren't the whole deck, and you'll need to obtain more than just the nerfed cards to play the deck that was nerfed. So no, you don't really get a refund, but that's neither here nor there, and the only way to really fix this is to make an economy so generous that it doesn't really matter. Side note over, now that we're done with the exception, let's talk about paper card games. The buffing and nerfing is the standard, but it's not something that a physical card game has an easy time doing. The translation would be the errata, where you reprint the card again, but with different text. All previous versions are now out of date, and reading the card no longer explains the card. But this is really hard to do. Not only does it confuse your player base, but it gives the people printing the cards even more work. You gotta reprint these at a timely manner, something that may just be impossible. And so, erratas are only used in very extreme circumstances, where there is no other option, such as a whole keyword mechanic being changed, or the main character's ace monster in the show being overpowered in the game. The point is, the errata is a last resort, one that we try our best to avoid. So if we can't nerf or buff cards, how do we do our best to achieve balance? How can we make our game in the best state it can be to have as many strategies and decks be competitive? Like I implied at the beginning, this is something that is a bit trickier in this genre. So let's discuss the 3 tools developers have to balance physical card games. And those are rotation, the ban list, and printing new cards. Let's start off with rotation. Most of the time, card games have a standard format that is the primary way to play or compete in. And that format is comprised of the newest release sets and sometimes a pool of cards just so that there's a base to work with. And this means that if a card is too good, it's fine, it'll eventually rotate out and the problem fixes itself. Rotation keeps the game fresh and makes sure that nothing is an issue for too long. And that's how it works on paper, but in practice, it isn't as wonderful. First thing, not every card game has rotation. Let's just get that out of the way. And in practice, rotation just ends up being an avenue for power creep. You do want to rotate cards, but you can't rotate all of them at once. If you do, it alienates your player base. It's like all the cards you've collected for the past year don't matter. Stops feeling like a rotation, and it feels like a whole new format every year. And as much as we complain about how new cards are too good and they push out all previous decks, we may actually complain more about new expansions that don't provide enough power to shake things up. Playing the same decks for a whole year is pretty miserable. So we end up with expansions that are stronger and stronger, leading to a gradual increase in power level. Rotation will get rid of cards eventually, but waiting for however long, or waiting for the players to score enough points with the card, I don't really know how to feel about this system, is not enough by itself. Rotation is a good tool, but it's not universal and is more of a supplemental tool than the primary way to balance the game. I am glad that Shieldred and Reno are gone. Alright, moving on from rotation, we move on to the most common way that balance is implemented, and that is ban lists. If a card is too strong and you can't change it, there's only one thing left to do. You can just ban the card. Make it so that the card can no longer be ran in standard competition. Pretty simple. Card making people upset? Just get rid of it. But this is something that can have certain layers of depth to it. In a game like Magic, it's entirely binary. Either the card is banned or it's not, and that's the case with most games. But if we look at Yu-Gi-Oh, it's a little bit more complex. There is the banned category, you can't play the card, then there is the limited category, you can only run one copy of it. And finally, the semi-limited category, where you can only run 2 copies out of the maximum 3. And Yu-Gi-Oh focuses extensively on the ban list because there is no rotation. That is the way that the format changes and becomes fresh again. And delving a bit deeper, let's explore the 2 ways that Konami hits decks with their ban list announcement. Hitting the payoffs and hitting consistency. Because the game is centered around archetypes, ban list hits are to tone down those specific archetypes. Not that there aren't bans to cards that are generally too good, there are plenty of those too. But in order to push an archetype out of the metagame, there are 2 target ways of utilizing the ban list. The first is to limit or ban cards that search, start combos, or search cards that start combos. This is hitting the consistency. In a perfect draw, it's as if nothing happened, you still have all your cards, just less of them. Your end boards are still as strong, it's just that you're less likely to get to them. The deck will still be playable, you can still perform the combos, but over the course of a tournament, you'll brick a whole lot more and it no longer makes sense to take the deck to a competition. Deck is technically not dead, but is certainly pushed out of the metagame. And the second way is by hitting the payoffs. Decks have end boards that they're striving towards, and if you ban one of the pieces you end on, then the deck will get weaker because it can't make that end piece anymore. A strict removal of a power piece. This is a more permanent way of dealing with an archetype. If you don't have your payoff, why even bother playing the deck? But it can also end up causing some collateral damage. Not every payoff is exclusively ran in the archetype it originates from. Sometimes collateral damage happens, one deck does too well with one payoff, and now other decks that also need the payoff that aren't performing nearly as well get inadvertently hit. I still can't play frogs because of Sprite. But what if you're against ban lists? I will admit, it feels absolutely awful to get a card, then be told that it's banned and you can't use it. And you can't even disenchant it for Arcane Dust. There has to be a way to balance your game without actively stripping parts of it out, right? So how about, instead of taking away cards, we add more cards? We print more cards to solve the issue? Card games are essentially physical live service games, and the patches are each new expansion. And in terms of balance, in this example, I don't mean power creeping the current decks out. I mean printing hate. If a deck is too good, then print specific cards that counter that deck. That way, the deck is worse, but it ends up being a deck building decision for the players, not something predetermined by the developers. You get the balance, but you also add player agency. Let's say that Lost Box will not leave the metagame. Print something like this Q-Rum in order to make their decks a bit riskier. Is the Dragon-type Dragapult wrecking havoc on boards? Then print a card that makes it take weakness from all your Psychic types. And because the Pokemon trading card game doesn't subscribe to ban lists, at least not for the standard format and not unless there's an emergency, instead of banning the Dusclops Dusknoir line, they instead printed a Psyduck that prevents them from exploding. And this isn't a Pokemon exclusive thing either. Hunger Crab in Hearthstone, Break the Ice in Magic, and Typhon in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just printing out more cards, the right cards, can end up leaving your game in a much better state. And because the game isn't a closed ecosystem, these cards that are printed as hate can even be good outside of what they're designed for. It's neat. And I think it's more of a natural progression than ban lists. Like I said earlier, these are essentially live service games. Each new expansion is a patch, and each new ban list is a new patch. And because of the physical aspect, we have to be a bit more creative when it comes to improving the game. It's just that for the state of the game, one takes away and one adds, and I do think that balancing the game in a diegetic way is better. Not to say we should only do one or the other, there have been enough emergency bannings and poorly thought out cards that everything should be looked at on a case-to-case basis. But the point I'm trying to say here at the end is, please print more Mimical cards, please?